So, here we are. Are you ready? Are you ready for Hurricane Dorian? Well, as we get ready, let's share together. If you want to turn to your Bibles to Matthew chapter 7, we're going to look at verses 15 through 20. Sorry, I don't have the bulletin, so I don't know the page number right off. I'm sure you professional Bible searchers will find it and share that page number with one another. This is Jesus still in the Sermon on the Mount, and he's saying, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns, or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will know them by their fruits." Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So I asked you that question a second ago. Give you time to think about it. Are you ready? Did you check your checklists? Did you check them twice? Have you braved the maddening crowds at Publix and Costco and Home Depot? Did you top off the gas tank? Or, like Mike McDonald, did you have to search in vain going from station to station? I was riveted with your journey on Facebook. You know, few things both unite and divide us as readily as preparations for the oncoming storm. We unite in our panic, and we divide as we jockey for parking spaces, the last bottle of water, and the free sandbags. And while we wait and wait and wait, we scroll through our phones, simultaneously laughing and cursing as we browse the memes on our social media feeds, thinking, why didn't we prepare sooner for this? Preparation is common sense that many of us do not have in common, it seems. We go about our business as these tropical waves blow off the coast of Africa, and when they finally make it to the Caribbean, we give them a passing glance, assuming that, like the others, this one will veer northwest and then northeast before fizzling on its way to Bermuda. But then that one doesn't behave like it should, and those cones of projection point right at the peninsula. Our mood starts to sour as we frantically rearrange our schedules, scramble for supplies. Welcome to life in Florida, friends. And though by no means are we alone in this struggle, the whole eastern coast and Gulf can attest to this. We find a way. You know, Dorian is one of those oddball storm names. Seems like they struggle to come up with names in that list every year, right? It's the kind you might expect to see deep in your family tree. Oh yes, I had a, first cousin thrice removed back in the day who was named Dorian. Or maybe it's one of those characters attached to that quirky sitcom or that novel that everyone's heard of, but not too many of us have actually read. It's a name that sounds very similar to the name of rather interesting fruit also. Have you heard of durian? Let me show of hands. Who's heard of durian? I got a few hands out there, okay. The durian is probably one of the most polarizing foods out there. You either love it or you hate it, and most Westerners seem to hate it. It's a native of Borneo and Sumatra, and it has this ominously thorny husk. It's too bad our screens aren't working there, because if you saw it, you'd be like, oh, I don't know if I'm eating that. It's often called the king of fruits in Southeast Asia, but it's also banned on most public transport because of its odor. You know, yesterday I went searching for a durian, and there was this one Asian market I found on Google that was conveniently located on the way to where I was getting dinner last night. So I thought, oh great, I'll just stop by there and then get dinner and go home, and I'll bring this thing to church and just scare the daylights out of everybody. But the store was closed. It's being renovated and rebranded. Must have been sold. So I took that as a sign. God does not want a durian in the house of worship. I watched this New York Times video where one of their correspondents tried to convince some Western tourists in Thailand that durian was a delicacy, and once they had that one whiff, suffice to say, they were not persuaded. But a few years ago, I tried durian creme brulee at the Hawker's restaurant on Mills Avenue. And yes, there was a hint of a foul odor that I won't describe in polite company. But the sweet side somehow won the day. I can't say that I have eaten one since, however. So the durian was the first fruit that popped into my head as I was figuratively chewing on our gospel text for today. Jesus is coming to the conclusion of the Sermon on the Mount, and he warns this congregation gathered there of false prophets who dress as sheep, but inside are ravenous wolves. So in contrast to the durian, whose pointy exterior and smelly interior convince you that the fruit will taste awful even before you take a bite, the false prophet is sort of the opposite. He pretends to be docile and trustworthy while planning to kill. And indeed, ravenous, the word we find in our text here, may not paint the whole picture of the Greek harpax, which connotes violent greediness that fully consumes or snatches away without care or concern. The false prophets then are not merely out to flatter or to mislead or to beguile. They are hungry to empty you, to leave you for dead on the side of the road, like the victim in the parable of the Good Samaritan. Seems like we live in a world of harpax sometimes, doesn't it? We compete ruthlessly for resources, operating out of a posture of greed and fear. Think of the escalating battles over fresh water, not just the ones on the shelf, but the battles that will only intensify as we pollute our springs, our aquifers, our rivers, our oceans. As the planet warms, our thirst grows, but our oases shrink and our mirages multiply. We grow corn as a fuel substitute. Then we change our minds and drill for some more oil, leaving a glut of food and or fuel on the market. We cling to the convenience of plastics, even as I've read about these giant twin vortices of Pacific trash. There's one in the east, one in the west, and they're largely comprised of microplastics that cloud the water in the midst of larger pieces of debris like fishing gear, shoes, and styrofoam. Today is September 1st. It's the World Day of Prayer for the Care of Creation. This day of recognition and stewardship of creation was begun by the patriarch of the Orthodox Church in 1989, our Eastern Orthodox friends, Russia and Greece, etc. And since then, it has been recognized by the Roman Catholic Church and the World Council of Churches. So I invite you to pray at some point today for how we as a church can, individually and collectively, be better stewards of God's handiwork. In a world that is rife with harpax, it is a challenge for Christians to testify to the good news of Jesus while living fully into his call for our own lives, as well as that of the whole planet. So I hope you pray that we meet that challenge. And for some reason, as I was reflecting on this special day of prayer, I thought of Epcot. You know, Disney revealed this past week that it will undergo the largest transformation in any Disney park's history over the next few years. I remember the attractions of Future World, the front half of the part that you neglect when you go there for the Food and Wine Festival, as some of you probably have been already. But this front half of the park has all these rides that are characterized by this pervasive sense of optimism. It says, in the face of challenges that are presented by humanity, ingenuity and innovation will overcome. I hope that spirit continues because I think we need that inspiration in light of the damage that we managed to do at the same time. Can we make the world a better place to live in spite of ourselves? I think the jury remains out on that question. And in the meantime, we followers of Jesus have a lot of work to do. You know, at last week's gathering of Impact, our student ministry, which, by the way, is not meeting today because we had to call it off early, not knowing what that storm was going to do, we were talking about fruit, specifically about which fruits are the hardiest, which fruits are the toughest under pressure. We had just read from John 15, where Jesus is sharing his final teaching with his disciples. He has just washed their feet in a demonstration of the kind of leadership that he expects them to model in his absence. He is about to be betrayed into the hands of the soldiers and the chief priests. And in the middle of these signs of sacrifice, he says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another, as I have loved you. No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." Jesus says they are no longer servants, but friends, for they know all they need to know. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you to go and bear fruit, fruit that will last, so that the Father will give you whatever you ask him in my name. After we finished reading, I asked the students to give me some examples of fruit that will last, of literal fruits, the kind that have a long shelf life. And most mentioned some type of citrus, which was fitting considering their tough skins. Apples were also mentioned. Strangely, no one said bananas, despite their thick skins. Also, when I asked if anyone liked to eat bananas with brown spots on them, no one raised their hand. It seems there's this sweet spot for bananas. Not just a time when the fruit tastes sweet, but also this window of opportunity to enjoy the not too hard, not too soft consistency of the flesh of the fruit. Call it the Goldilocks window, perhaps. Those precious hours when it's just right for peeling and eating. By the way, which end of the banana do you peel the banana from? From the stem end? Oh, no, friends. The professionals do it from the other end. They just pop that little end and it just peels like nobody's business. You don't have that break of the stem and you're sitting there trying to fiddle with the top. You know, when I discovered that just recently, I wondered why I had been betrayed for so long. So yes, bananas have this narrow window of maximum enjoyment because they produce high amounts of ethylene. It's a gas that all fruits produce as they ripen. And bananas are just really good at this. So the lesson, it seems, is this. If you want to bear fruit that will last, make sure it's not too gassy. I know that sounds funny, but bear with me for a moment. Now, when a person is talking too much and without saying much of substance, we might hear that person labeled a gas bag, maybe long-winded. These metaphors emphasize that being thoughtful and deliberative has its advantages. That thinking before speaking is an asset, not a liability. And it applies not just to speech, but to actions too. One steadfast rule of investing is to take the long view, to not be too swayed by sudden market fluctuations. And that is what Jesus was teaching all who gathered with him on the hillside that day. That people can say all sorts of things, but what they do is what matters at the end of the day. This seems to be a message that the church in particular needs to hear today. We worry about a world that is increasingly turning a blind eye to our invitations to follow Jesus, and we wonder why. Today's younger generations are very attuned to authenticity. Like Jesus, they believe that actions speak louder than words. So while we sing and pray and proselytize, what are we doing to make the world a more peaceful and just place for all? What are we doing to welcome strangers instead of fearing them? What are we doing to feed the hungry, to clothe those in rags who beg for food on the side of the road, to cure the sick and to visit those in prison? What are we doing not just to alleviate the suffering, but to try to prevent the suffering in the first place? Why not envision a world where there are no strangers, where there are no hungry, where folks can work and be proud of their contributions and not have to worry about where their next meal is coming from? Why not envision a world where people have access to the best medical care regardless of their paycheck, and where locking people up is the least of our imagination of justice for all? Last week we read the Hebrew scripture lesson from Deuteronomy 30, a time when Moses was sharing some of his final words with the people of Israel before he would die, be replaced, and they would enter the promised land. I want to read a little bit more from Deuteronomy 30, a little bit before the speech we heard last week, where Moses says, "Then you shall again obey the Lord, observing all his commandments that I am commanding you today. And the Lord your God will make you abundantly prosperous in all your undertakings, in the fruit of your body, in the fruit of your livestock, and in the fruit of your soil. For the Lord will again take delight in prospering you, just as he delighted in prospering your ancestors, when you obey the Lord your God by observing his commandments and decrees that are written in this book of the law, because you turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul." Here Moses was reminding Israel that obeying God's laws would lead to fruitful life and abundance. As the people turned heart and soul to God, so would they prosper. And Moses promised that this would not be a difficult thing for them. He said to them, "Surely this commandment that I am commanding you today is not too hard for you, nor is it too far away. It is not in heaven that you should say, 'Who will go up to heaven for us and get it for us so that we may hear it and observe it?' Neither is it beyond the sea so that you should say, 'Who will cross to the other side for us and get it for us so that we may hear it and observe it?' No, the word is very near to you. It is in your mouth and in your heart for you to observe." In your mouth, Moses said, like the choicest fruit, sweet and delicious for enjoying. In your heart, Moses said, like the vitamins and minerals that keep the life force flowing in our bodies. Not only have we been given clear commands, like the nation of Israel, to do what is right and just, we have been assured, like Israel, that these are not pie in the sky, nice to have, but not realistic goals. To quote Winston Zeddemore, a character played by Ernie Hudson in one of my favorite movies, Ghostbusters, "We have the tools and we have the talent." The question is, do we really believe this? Do we believe what our spiritual forebear taught? Do we believe the words Jesus shared that day and count it as common sense faith? Or do we search the thorny scrubs and shrubs, hoping to find grapes? Do we pick through the thistles, hoping to find the figs? Longtime Floridians are well aware of the history of the citrus industry in this state, as freezes and various pests have decimated the groves over the years, and as people continue to flock to Florida to retire or just avoid living in those colder climes up north, those once vast swaths of grove land have been systematically abandoned, sold, and sliced up for development. The trees that can no longer bear good fruit, fruit that is diseased or soured or frozen beyond saving, have been bulldozed and burned. But those that continue to bear good fruit, those that heed the commandments, those that provide for the needs of the least among us, these still prosper. These are saved from destruction. The word is very near to us. We take him at his word as we approach him at this table. The word who became flesh, sweet to the taste and strengthening for the soul. The bread and the cup on this table are the finest of fruits, the most wholesome for the sustenance of our spirit. They empower us for service to a broken and fearful world. They provide resolve to overcome our own fear and to be bold in our proclamation that the world as it is not the world as it should be. This, friends, is soul food at its finest. Not only does it grow our common sense faith, it fortifies our uncommon sense that we are called to love the Lord our God with heart, mind, soul, and strength, and our neighbors as ourselves. Through this common meal, we bear uncommon witness to the scandalous foolishness of the gospel, that what the world values, status, wealth, power, privilege, is exactly what leads to the giant bonfire around which the people of God will roast marshmallows and sing praises to Jesus the Christ. Let us humble ourselves then as we prepare to share this meal together. We know these fruits, and we know the grower and the provider. He is not ravenous, and we can trust him to be the lamb that he dressed himself to be. Gentle, generous, self-sacrificing, welcoming to all who would partake. May our sharing in his body and blood help us to know our fruits as well. And may they be pleasing to the taste of a hungry world.